Now, one is similar to a movie you guys may have watched. It had Jodie Foster in it. It was called Nail. Has anyone seen that movie, Nail? Okay. And then there's a case of two little girls who were actually found and removed from the home due to isolation abuse. And that was Isabel and Jeannie. Now, Jeannie was found at about age 13 and Isabel at about age 6. So I put both of them in the book for questions of comparison between the two. This research brought up lots of writing in the field of psychology, sociology, about something called critical periods in development of human beings. Is there a time in which human beings have to be exposed to certain things in order to learn them? Is there a critical period? And then after that critical period is over, can then human beings never catch up? Will the ill effects of isolation be irreversible? And at what age? How long? So we actually have two cases that we'll talk about. Now, the first case actually happened in the 1800s, where the human being comes. This is a guy named Victor. That's what they name him. He actually shows up in a missionary, kind of a monastery in France. And the kids are taken there because this is the place where knowledge is, where people read books and where the priests and the Benedictine monks actually study and are learning and writing. And so there's a linguist there by the name of Philippe Itard, I-T-A-R-D, Philippe Itard. Now, Itard tries to take Victor in and socialize him. He's about 6 or 8. Now, here's Victor. Victor comes in the time and there's snow coming down. And it's cold as heck outside, obviously. It's winter when he shows up, and he's totally naked. His hair is disheveled and dirty. He has hair on his body. But he runs all over the place like a chimp on 4s. He grunts and moans and makes noises but doesn't talk. He urinates and defecates wherever he is. Okay, he has no training in terms of toilet training activities. He's wild, running, screaming, hollering, running around, making chip sounds, okay? There's films of him, actually. So they try to teach him language. He gets socialized some, but he never really learns how to use language. He never can overcome those ill effects. Now, years later, we find Jeannie, and there's a whole team of people who study Jeannie, including people getting their dissertations done, linguists, and their psychologists, developmental psychologists as well. It's called the Jeannie team. Actually, one of the professors at the OU Health Science Center was part of that team, an expert in isolation among people. Okay, so during this time then, Jeannie is found. Jeannie's mother is deaf, so she uses sign language, but she doesn't speak. She's been feeding Jeannie. These things happened during the time when if you had a child out of wedlock, it was looked down upon. And so the parents would hide these children to keep people from knowing their daughter had had a child. And the grandfather in Jeannie's case said, let's get rid of her and lock her up in a closet where no one can see her. So Jeannie was often strapped to a potty chair for 24, 48 hours at a time in a dark closet. She never heard the language because her mother didn't speak it. So her mother would open the door and throw some food in basically occasionally and shut the door again. So when Jeannie came along, she hopped like a bunny rabbit on her toes. And she walked like this. There's some pictures of her. If you Google Jeannie, you can see. And she would talk, and you couldn't hardly understand. Okay, it sounded kind of like me when I had an allergic reaction and my tongue swelled up and I couldn't use my tongue to talk. And I'm in the emergency room and they're asking me what's wrong, and I'm going, and I sounded about like that. It was pretty weird sounding. But Jeannie can't speak the language because she hasn't heard it. So one thing we learned from these children is if you don't hear the language, you don't learn to speak it. Now, Linkus will tell you that we're born with all kinds of sounds we can make. And then over the first 3 or 4 months of life, we begin to get rid of the sounds we don't need. You can actually say sounds and pronounce things that would be in the Japanese language at that time, sounds they require, or the French language. But if you're French, you'll lose the sounds that some English sounds make, and you'll never quite be able to get rid of your accent because we lose that ability to use those sounds. Does that make sense to you too? There's a sound to language. Now, you guys have heard little ones learn to talk. My 13-month-old granddaughter is beginning that now. It's called babbling. And you hear them in there going, blah, 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 blah. And my wife will sing, and she will sing along with her, the Backyardigans song. And so they start singing the Backyardigans, and it's almost like she can almost get it, but not quite. But you can hear the inflections, can't you? When we ask a question, then we raise our voice at the end. What do you think? Okay, and the question, the inflections, and the way we give syntax, the way we put sentences together, phonemes, morphemes, those basic parts of sound and speech begin to develop too. So Harlow's showing you gotta be socialized. Now, this research and this research here couples with some research done during World War II. And this is a time of great bombing going on, carpet bombing of cities. And so lots of innocent civilians are killed in the bombs. And then the parents are dead, so the young babies are actually sent to an orphanage because there's so many of them. And in Romania, there's a great big huge orphanage where the children are, and they can't get around to every child, so they fix up this little container like the Wire Mother where they can prop a bottle up and they can move it over to the baby's crib and put it where the baby can get the milk and drink the milk. And then they move on, and they're in a great big warehouse kind of setting, and they just go down the row and change the diapers. Wouldn't you like that job? And then come back and change them this way, and then prop bottles up. And then the infant mortality rate among the babies goes way up. And the babies start dying at a very high number. So they call a protege of Freud's, a guy named Spitz, Rene Spitz. And he comes over to look at the babies and what's going on and why are they dying so easily and in such frequency. And he says the reason is because they're not getting human contact. Eye contact, holding, caring. So this is the time in hospitals where we started hiring rockers for babies whose moms were ill. And you can actually still do that job, I think. Or maybe nurses do it on their off time often. But you go into the nursery and you hold the babies and feed them. and sing to them and look them in the eye and talk to them so they can hear the language and they can have the human contact. This language and human contact then become necessary for normal development. So what we look at Isabel is, and Jeannie, no language development in either one. Jeannie, similar life story, found at 6, found at 13. Now this case with Isabel is complicated. I won't get into it too much with you, but there's actually sleep spindles on her EEG, and spindles is kind of like a spinning on a spindle on a thread, and it kind of goes like this real quick and kind of wraps around itself. And those are, when you find that in children, it's usually brain damage. So they wonder if she wasn't also physically abused where her brain was injured, so she didn't develop language as well. So this case, it's a little harder to tell about language development. There's some complications, okay, although she's given IQ tests, etc. Now, Isabel, found at 6, is raised. People pick her up. People start talking to her. Developmental people come in, work with her, help her to develop. Jeannie as well, psychologists, experts. And then Isabel, by grade 6, is pretty normal. She's caught up in the language. She's caught up in her ability to talk. She's functioning, making A's and B's in school. She seems to be getting along fairly well. She seems to have overcome. Jeannie ends up living in a home for adults that can't care for themselves as she gets older. Her mother comes back in the picture, tries to adopt her back. She's lost custody. There's a custody fight. This gets nasty because the treatment team gets over-involved with the case, loses their boundary, takes her home to live with them, try to help her, try to raise her because she's so endearing. If you see pictures of her, your heart goes out to her and you want to help her. So boundaries were busted. It's a good study for ethics and an ethics course and boundaries with human beings, what's best. She was over-tested for sure. And people sued and said she was given too many tests. Became part of too many PhD dissertations research-wise, and so kind of overcooked here. So you see Jeannie and you see Isabel, both needing, kind of like the marasmus studies, which is Spitz. These babies were dying of something that is a group of symptoms called marasmus. Today we would call it the failure to thrive child. Okay, and if you nurses run into that, you'll run into children who are ignored, left alone, not attended to. Now, if you get the idea of what I'm talking about with the monkeys and the isolation, can you see then children growing up in a kind of if we put it out here, we could say really, really ignored, less ignored, a little less ignored, little better, pretty good, getting really good, excellent home to grow up in. And we could see a continuum, could you not? Now, today, what we're looking at is a continuum where a child is not attended to. And we all know that goes on. I don't know if you guys have done it, but I've done it, where I've gone into homes and taken babies out of homes with the caseworkers. And we've had to cut diapers off of babies because they have had them on so long they're stuck to them. We have to deal with some horrific smells in the house where they weren't cleaned, where there were multiple cats and dogs, and the parents were schizophrenic and nobody knew this was going on. And so we have children from those backgrounds who we put into foster care and who we try to help as much as we can. And then we have children coming out of a model home. Now, if you come out of an average or better home in the middle class, then you're going to hear about 3,000 words, spoken words every hour in your house. People reading to you, people talking to you, people trying to get you to sound things out. So when I'm walking around with Claire and she goes, I'll go, yeah, microwave. And she'll go, oh, and I'll say, doggy. And she'll say, doggy, doggy. And I'll say, that's the dog, dog, dog. She's getting the language. Pretty soon she'll be saying, go McDonald's. I just know it's coming. Okay. But kids babble. And then after they babble, they do what's called telegraph speech. Now, telegraph speech is for you young people, back when you used to write things out. It's still the way with obituaries, if you ever have to write one. But you have to pay so much per word. And the words are very high. So you try to say things without verbs and just nouns and places like meat, 12th, vine, 10. That's telegraph speech. So children start going, blue ball. Okay? And then pretty soon, buy blue ball. And you go, buy blue ball, buy blue ball. And then pretty soon, go store, buy ball. Now once they get there, they go from about, 18 months, they go from about, 30 words or so to 3,000 almost overnight. It's like all of a sudden it clicks that you can put words together, then sentences you haven't taught them to say. And all of a sudden they can put it together and say, blue ball, store, buy ball. And you go, wow, I didn't teach you to say that, to go buy something. And before long they will say, won't they, Happy Meal, toy, okay? And so we'll learn the language by hearing the language, imitating the language, and then being reinforced. However, learning language is not just reinforcement theory, because more goes on in learning language than what you teach. Kids all of a sudden, and that's where the chimps can't do it. They can take words and sounds, and then they can pick up more language, and then they can start constructing syntax and the way things are supposed to sound, and they can start creating sentences. And if we had a book of sentences that children say, we couldn't fill it. Okay, there's too many, and there's too many combinations. Okay. So, cases of social isolation.